Good morning. I know a number of our family are at home watching online, many of them caring for themselves with COVID or others with COVID, and so we want to say welcome to you as well. We're pausing our Sunday morning series on the book of Jonah for today. We just started last Sunday. We'll continue next Sunday in the book of Jonah. But today is Vision Sunday, and so I want to spend some time talking with you about 2022. Outdoor seating in New York City at restaurants, in Stamford at restaurants, and in other cities and restaurants has become about as normal as indoor seating at restaurants. When COVID first swept through New York City, restaurant owners petitioned to move the indoor dining, which was being curtailed, to outdoor dining in lean-tos and porticos and all kinds of creative structures where that ventilation would mitigate the spread of COVID. It started in earnest as an emergency program in New York City in June of 2020. 11,000 restaurants petitioned to be part of that first wave, and 100,000 people's jobs were saved as a result of it. Raise your hand if you've done any outdoor dining at all in the last year or so. Most of us have. Now, we faced a similar situation as we were preparing for our annual December a cappella Christmas sing-along and storytelling last month. We originally had envisioned a large reception after the event downstairs in Community Room 2 with lots of drinks and food. But as the COVID numbers began to rise, we wondered if that was the right thing to do. We wondered if we should just cancel that altogether. But then we felt like, no, we need to still offer something, and so we moved that reception outside, even though we knew it was going to be cold, even though we knew it was going to be dark. And we offered that outdoor snacking for very much the same reason that restaurant owners are offering this outdoor dining. And it's because we want to get as many people to the table as we can. We realize, and of course restaurant owners realize, that there is something special about coming together over a table. There is a kind of community that happens when we gather at a table, even if it's cold, even if it's dark, that just doesn't happen on a Zoom call, that doesn't happen on a phone call, or even in a hallway, or even in a worship service. And so we want to get as many people as we can to the table. That is the desire of the host in this parable. He wants to get as many people as possible to the table. Listen again to some of his closing words. Go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. The host in this parable wants nothing more than to have his house filled with people sitting at his table. As a parable, it points us to God. And God very much wants the same thing. He wants as many people as possible to come to his table. He wants his house filled. And so as we move towards 2022, we want to take more steps towards God's desire of having more people at his table. Now, that's not to say that we're about to embark on a pack the pews kind of campaign. That's not to say that for 2022, what matters most in this church is attendance. This vision in this parable is ultimately about hungry people. people who are experiencing many different kinds of hunger and who can be fulfilled by taking their place at the table of God. For 2022, we want to take more steps toward fulfilling that vision. Now, how do we do that? Well, in this parable, there are three groups of people that represent three groups that we might focus on as we move into 2022. Listen again to this text about the first group of people. But he said to them, a man once gave a great banquet and invited many, and at the time for the banquet he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, "Come, for everything is now ready." But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, "I bought a field, and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused." And another said, "I bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to examine them. Please have me excused." And another said, "I've married a wife, and therefore I cannot come." So the servant came and reported these things to his master. The first group of people in this parable are people who don't even seem to want to be bothered by the invitation to come to the table. They've got busy schedules. They've got a lot of things going on. Some of them have business dealings going on. Some of them have family things going on. And it seems like they don't want to be bothered to come to the table. And yet in this parable, they are invited anyway. In this parable, Jesus urges us to call, to invite those who may not want to be bothered to come to the table. We live in one of the most unchurched areas in this country. And as we move into 2022 and we try to move into the world envisioned by this parable, and we call more people to find their place at the table of God, one of the things that will inevitably happen is that we will encounter people who don't want to be bothered with that invitation. They've got full schedules. They've got career things going on. They've got family things going on. And yet the challenge of this parable is that Jesus urges us to invite them anyway. Even if it seems they don't want to be bothered, Jesus urges us to call them, to extend the invitation. Let me talk about some things that we might do in this year that would make this a little easier for us. First, we want to encourage all of the members and friends associated with this congregation to invite friends to what we're tentatively calling Share the Love events. We've identified a handful of Sundays and events during this year that we think, well, it'd be easy for you to invite someone to come online or to come on site to be part of that Sunday or to be part of that event. These are the Sundays, these are the events that we want to pour our prayers into, our energies into, our advertising into during 2022. Because we think that by inviting friends to these events, that'll take a step in this direction of helping more people find their way to the table of God. Later this year, during our Christmas Share the Love event, I could envision us taking these 2 giant oak trees that are just behind us here on the high point of our property and wrapping them in Christmas lights. It would probably be the largest lighting display in the local area. I suspect even as you drive 80 miles an hour down the Merritt, you would see these giant oak trees wrapped in Christmas lights. How fun would it be to invite folks to come to something like that later in December? I think it could be a gathering place for people in this community as they bring their friends, they bring their family members, they bring their pets to take pictures beneath these 2 giant oak trees. I also want to encourage us to consider in 2022 upgrading at least one of our outdoor spaces so that it has lighting and heat. So that when COVID dictates or when other circumstances dictate, we can move events and fellowships outside and have adequate lighting and have adequate heating. Maybe it's taking the picnic space out in the green space here and stringing lights between the trees and putting in some large propane heaters, or even taking the courtyard on the other side of the building where the waterfall is and stringing lights there, putting up some large propane heaters in that space. If you came for our outdoor reception during the Christmas sing-along, maybe we didn't light it. Maybe we made it cold so that you realize how important these things can be when we gather together outside. But how easy would it be to invite friends and family during 2022 to come to some events that might even be held in these upgraded outdoor spaces? Just think about some of the people who are part of this family who are here because they were invited. Anne Mazzone was invited by Demas, and last year she became a beloved member of this family. Last Sunday, James invited Uta, and she came and she was warmly greeted by so many of you. Those are the simple kinds of invitations that we want to see take place more and more as we move into 2022, even as we encounter people who may not want to be bothered by that invitation. Now, there's a second group in this parable. Then the master of the house became angry and said to his servant, "Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city and bring in the poor and crippled and blind and lame." And the servant said, "Sir, what you commanded has been done, and still there is room." The first group's been invited, and still there's lots of room left at the table. And what does God want more than anything? He wants his house filled. And so the servants are sent back out. And notice who they are called to invite: the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame. Think about that group for just a second. It would be insufficient with this group to simply extend the invitation. These are people who are dealing with tremendous challenges and difficulties in their lives. Some of these people, the lame, the crippled, might actually have to be carried to the table. Virtually all of these people would have to be accompanied to the table. And so Jesus is urging us in this parable to carry those who may not be able to come to the table, not simply to call those who may not want to be bothered to come to the table, but to carry those who may not be able to come to the table. There are so many people in this community and the larger community who are dealing with great difficulties and great challenges in their lives, whether it's mentally or emotionally or physically. And it would be insufficient to simply extend an invitation to one of them to come to a Share the Love event. Instead, the challenge would be to come alongside them, to accompany them, and when necessary, to even carry them, so they too may find their place at the table of God. This is why during 2022 we'll continue this good work that Debbie Pauls leads us in, serving men who are homeless at the Pacific House. We can't just invite them to come to some event. They're dealing with tremendous challenges in their own lives. And so each month we have an opportunity to prepare a meal for them, to serve a meal for them, a way of coming alongside them and even carrying them in a way, so that eventually they too may find their way to the table of God. Hope for Haiti's children will continue to be a focus for us as well into 2022. Children of Haiti are living with tremendous challenges and difficulties, which include poverty and lack of education and lack of resources. And this ministry is one of the ways in which we can accompany them and come alongside them to help them find their way to the table of God. We'll continue our good work with Shiloh. We hope to relaunch Buddy Mentoring because all of these ministries are a way of doing what these servants have been sent out to do in this parable. Something new that we'll do in 2022 under the leadership of Tyler and Tatiana Johnson is launch a ministry called Friends Speak. This ministry provides opportunities for those for whom English is not their first language to grow in their capacity for conversational English using the Bible as a source for that. It can be a great challenge to live in this country and yet struggle with the English language. And so this ministry will allow us to come alongside many people in this community to provide this needed resource to accompany them in that as a way of helping them find themselves at the table of God. Another new thing that I hope that we can be a part of in 2022, it doesn't exist yet, but it's something that I prayerfully hope will exist at some point in this year, and that is an interfaith day of service, where houses of worship all over this area come together, and we link arms and hands together with them to simply serve people in our communities, again as a way of coming alongside, of accompanying people, and even carrying them when necessary. This year we'll have 3 contemplative retreats. The first of those is coming up next Sunday, 1:30 to 4:30. You can join us online or in person. And we've placed these in the calendar because we understand how critical it is for us to have space, to be grounded, to be centered in Christ. Because it's that grounding and that centering in Christ that allow us to go out and to extend that invitation, to accompany people, to even carry people. Something else that we've added into the budget for 2022 is a new line item funding ministry interns like Julia Clark. We want to live into our own calling to be a teaching church, like a teaching hospital, where we're helping to raise up that next generation of leaders who can help us call and carry people in our community, and whom we can train to go to other places to call and to carry people. Because God wants His house to be filled. And then there's a third group in this parable. And the master said to the servant, "Go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled." People living in the highways and hedges are people who live a long ways away from this host's house. And because of that distance, the servants are told to compel those people to come in. Now, the word compel doesn't mean to force. They're not going to the highways and hedges and ransacking houses and dragging people to the table of the host. The word compel here might better mean persuade. Now, why would people living so far away have to be persuaded? They have to be compelled because they're not going to believe that they have a place at this table. These are people who have lived so far away from the table that when the invitation comes, they're not going to believe that it's for them. And so the servants are going to have to do a little bit of work to say, no, this invitation is for you. You have a place at this table. And so in this parable, Jesus is urging us to compel people who may not believe that they too can come to the table. There's so many people in our own communities for whom this is true. Some of them have lived at such a distance from God, or at such a distance from the church that if they were to hear an invitation from you, they wouldn't believe it. And some of them have been so traumatized by religion, or even shut out by religion, that they've been conditioned to believe that the invitation is not for them. And so one of the things that we need to do as we move into 2022 is identify those people and to compel them. This invitation is for you. Now, I think that we have done some great work in this area, especially when it comes to issues of gender and issues of sexuality. We are becoming a place where women can participate fully in the life of this church, where members of the LGBTQ community can participate fully in the life of this church. And I think there's still important work for us to do there. And so that's why during 2022, one of the things I hope for is that we'll continue this emerging relationship that we have with Centerpiece, a ministry based in Churches of Christ that helps churches like ours reach out to the LGBTQ community. And I hope in 2022 we will identify additional groups of people who fit this third group, who for one reason or another have felt shut out or left out of God's table. And that we'll find ways to go to them and say, this invitation is for you. You too have a place at the table of God. One of the things that we'll be doing during Wednesday nights is offering a 5-part seminar that we're calling Love in Training. And we're going to take some Wednesday nights throughout this year to deeply dive into the great command to love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Because the more we fully understand what it means to love God and to love our neighbor, the easier it's going to become for us to fulfill the vision of this parable, to call, to compel, and even to carry people so that they find their place at the table of God. Don't you love a full table? You know, many nights at our table, just over here in the parsonage, it's Kendra and I. And we have good conversation and we eat good food. But over the Christmas holidays, that number doubled. And we had Jordan and Jacob sitting at our table. And it was delightful to have those extra faces at the table and to enjoy good food together and to engage in conversation together. And then the Sunday after Christmas, there were 3 more people at that table because Mike and Penny and Andrew Gilliland came to worship service, and just sort of last minute, we invited them to come over to the house, and so we ate pizza and drank soda at our table, engaged in great conversation. It is so fun to sit at a full table. And that is one of the greatest desires of God. He wants his house full. And during 2022, I hope that we'll come together to take more steps to make that vision a reality. In these last few seconds, I want to invite you to just meditate on these 3 questions. Who can I call to God's table? Who can I carry to God's table? And who can I compel to God's table?